There's no such thing as a boss with a low educational background.
Kevin, the president's son, sneered at me.
That's right, you're fired.
The department head continued in a mocking tone. These are insults that I've been subjected to time and time again. Both Kevin and the department head, every time they see me, they make fun of me like it's their catchphrase. The one saying it might not feel anything, but the one being told surely doesn't take it lightly. I'm done tolerating this at such a company. I'll make them regret mocking me. Understood. Being fired is fine with me. I resign effective today. I put my plan into action. My name is Mike Anthony. I'm an employee working for a mid-sized food wholesale company called Y Foods. I'm reaching almost 25 years of service. I've crossed the age of 50. Looking back, my life so far feels like it passed in the blink of an eye. Influenced by my father, becoming a professional boxer was my dream since childhood. So, right after high school, I immediately joined a boxing gym and aimed to become a pro boxer while working part-time to make ends meet. A year after joining, I passed my first pro test with flying colors and obtained a C-class license. With the license, I could step into the professional ring. In other words, I took the first step towards my dream. From then on, while working, I dedicated myself to boxing wholeheartedly. Day after day, I did my road work without fail, pounded the sandbag relentlessly. I wanted to become stronger, to become a boxer who could make a living just by boxing. With that in mind, I struggled tirelessly, but things didn't go as planned. Winning and losing repeatedly, I eventually realized that 5 years had passed. I wanted to become a champion and bask in the spotlight. With that dream in mind, I endured rigorous training, but reality wasn't kind, and I ended up hanging up my gloves halfway through. The cause was the discovery of an eye disease. Since it was a condition that could affect my career as a boxer, I was forced to retire due to a doctor's order. Right after retirement, I lost hope for living and became reckless. I drowned myself in alcohol and led a rough life. Lost and uncertain about how to carry on, I found myself at a crossroad in life. I only have a high school diploma and was scraping by with odd jobs anyone could do. I had nothing to be proud of. My saving grace came in the form of a gym owner. Concerned about my straightforward life, he offered me a job opportunity. That's how I joined the company I work for now, Y Foods, introduced by the gym owner. Back then, the president of Y Foods, Michael Jackson, was a die-hard boxing fan and the sponsor of the gym I belonged to. Meeting him was a stroke of luck for me. He's a man passionate about supporting boxers' second careers. My job is to visit producers to source ingredients and get them on the sales channels. I lacked education and professional skills, so I had to leverage my own physical presence, tackling tasks head-on to build a track record. As I lacked professional manners, I initially faced rejection everywhere. But as I kept pushing on, people started to resonate with my dedication. I realized that successful negotiations are not about superficial talk, but about genuinely connecting with others. This approach paid off, and now I manage sales channels exceeding $500,000 a month. All these are bonds formed through heartfelt connections. Michael, the former president, always welcomed the contracts I brought in with open arms.
Mike, you're still pushing hard. Seems like your boxing days agility is still with you.
Thanks. My mind might be blank, but I've got to make a living with my legs and heart. Michael and I always shared a smile whenever we crossed paths at work. What worked out well for me was that Michael didn't place me in an existing department, but allowed me to act freely as part of his direct team. He was considerate enough to think that integrating me, with my limited professional experience, into the organization might crush me. Thanks to that, I was able to act as I pleased and achieved a lot. However, This privileged situation disappeared with the change of president. Michael, who had taken a liking to me, stepped down due to health reasons. His eldest son, John, took over as president. Unlike Michael, who had built up the food industry from scratch, John was an elite who graduated from a top-tier university. Therefore, his way of thinking was fundamentally different from Michael's. John aimed to restructure the company into a more rational organization, eliminating all inefficiencies and exceptions, while Michael used to place people flexibly beyond organizational boundaries. John completely opposed this approach. With John's reforms, my free-roaming role was lost. Then I was assigned to the sales department. Previously, as part of the president's direct team, I wasn't closely managed, but under the department head's supervision, various restrictions were imposed on me. I, who had been freely visiting producers and achieving results, now had to constantly report where, when, and what I was doing, regardless of the outcomes. It's probably expected in the professional world, but for someone inexperienced like me, it started to feel suffocating. Yet, John allowed me some freedom. He probably realized that too many constraints would negate my strengths. He then created a new division called the Third Department in Sales and appointed me as its manager. So, I didn't have such a bad impression of John's presidency. It wasn't the freedom I had under Michael, but it wasn't too dismal either. However, 3 years after John took over, a situation I'd call a disaster struck me. The head of the sales department was replaced by Steve. Steve was an extreme academic elitist. Before discussing sales performance or contribution to the company, he judged people by their education. With his high academic credentials, Steve would speak on equal terms with those of similar education and revered those with higher qualifications. On the other hand, he thoroughly looked down on those with lower education, and this bias extended to the company's hierarchy, flattering those above him more likely to rise, while harshly belittling those in lower positions. And I became the perfect target for Steve.
Hey, Mike, you don't know this. What college did you go to again? Oh, right. Just high school.
Steve ridicules me for being a high school graduate. He flaunts his knowledge and takes the upper hand when he sees I don't understand something. I think jealousy over my accomplishments played a part too. He couldn't stand that someone with far less education than him was appointed as a manager and receiving special treatment.
Hey, you used to be a boxer, right? Don't try to intimidate with your fists just because you're not smart.
I wouldn't do that. When I glared back, Steve quickly responded,
Whoa, don't look so scary. Better watch out, everyone. He's a boxer.
Steve would stir things up and ridicule me in front of other employees. I struggled to suppress the rising anger and retorted, I'm not fighting with my fists. I'm competing with my legs, and here, pointing to my head. Saying that, I placed my fist against my chest. Then Steve glared at me, lowering his voice to intimidate.
Don't get cocky. You might have been favored since the previous president, but now that I'm in charge, no more special treatment.
Until then, I had the freedom to visit any producer across the country. However, since Steve became the department head, I had to pay for all travel expenses myself unless I got his approval. For someone who built their reputation on legwork, this was a matter of survival. But this was just the beginning of the troubles. The next year, things got even worse. The president's son, Kevin, who got in through connections, was assigned to the sales department's third division that I manage. Kevin is a high-achieving elite, adored by Steve. On top of that, he holds the unmatched title of the president's son. Being an elite and the president's son, it's natural that he's considered the next president. Sensing this, Steve was all over Kevin, trying to win his favor. On the other hand, Kevin, flattered by Steve, was on cloud nine.
Kevin, you're an elite from a top-tier university. You obviously has deep insights. It's a world of difference compared to some boxing fool.
Hey, Steve, who's the boxing fool?
Steve pointed at me.
That tough guy over there, trying to compensate for his stupidity with brute force. Stay away, or stupidity might be contagious.
Steve was bad-mouthing me to Kevin, trying to instill a negative image.
But you can't get into this company if you're dumb, right?
You'd think so, but he's just a high school grad.
Steve said that smugly, and Kevin smirked.
Really? A high school grad as a manager? It's embarrassing to have a boss with just a high school diploma.
Exactly. The former president liked boxing, so he must have been a special hire. Kind of a sympathy hire, if you will. And yet, he clings to that favor, shamelessly overstaying his welcome.
Their conversation echoed through the quiet office. Steve spoke loudly, making sure I could hear, and Kevin matched his tone. Noticing my gaze, Steve smirked.
I'm really worried, you know, Kevin. You've been assigned to the same third division as a boxing idiot, without any consultation with me, the head. What on earth is the president thinking?
Clearly, Steve was displeased with Kevin's assignment to the third division. But I felt the same. I didn't want to babysit some privileged kid. Dealing with a high-flying, well-connected elite was the last thing I wanted. To me, Kevin was nothing but a curse.
Hey, Mike.
One day during lunch, as I was reading on my laptop, Steve called out rudely. His call was so rude that I approached with a scowl, and then Steve thrust his palm forward. Apparently, it was a signal to come no closer. I faced Steve with a resigned look.
Listen, Kevin is not your subordinate, all right? Don't get it twisted.
He said that snidely. Next to him, Kevin gave me a wry smile, catching my eye. I silently glared at Steve. Then, as I shifted my gaze to Kevin, Steve stepped between us.
Be careful, Kevin. This dumb boxer is quick to throw a punch.
I felt my blood boil. It wasn't just an insult to me, but to all boxers. I had never used my fists outside the ring, but I couldn't help thinking how satisfying it would be to land a solid punch on Steve's face. Such thoughts crossed my mind. Steve, thinking I wouldn't retaliate, continued to taunt me with arrogance. I knew I shouldn't take the bait, yet my fists itched to respond. But no, that would be the end of everything. I managed to suppress the rising anger and walked away. Since Kevin joined, Steve's harassment intensified daily. Travel expenses were no longer approved, and soon even self-funded trips were restricted. Furthermore, Steve proposed simultaneously lowering the purchase price from producers and raising the selling price to retailers. The plan was to buy cheap from the producers and sell high to the clients, aiming to make a hefty profit. If we do that, we'll lose all the trust we've built. I protested fiercely.
Trust? Don't make me laugh. Those farmers and clients probably think they can fool you because you're uneducated.
Steve's words fueled my anger, and I felt my temples throbbing. That's not true. Our producers take pride in their work. We must fairly evaluate and purchase their goods at a reasonable price. That's the role of a wholesaler. I countered with reason. But Steve was dismissive.
Stop talking nonsense. That's not how you make money in business. It's all about outsmarting each other. The smart exploit the foolish. The deceivers win, and the deceived lose. That's business for you.
Steve was so focused on profit that he neglected the care needed for producers and retailers. A wholesaler that exploits for greed loses trust and will eventually be ousted from the market. Steve didn't get that. Meanwhile, Kevin mocked my face-to-face meetings with producers and retailers.
Meeting in person is so outdated. Everything can be done online now. You really are from the old school. Plus, you're not the sharpest tool in the shed.
I meet with producers to taste their products firsthand and understand the effort behind their flavors. It's about grasping hands with calloused fingers, seeing the wrinkles on foreheads, and sharing smiles, things only possible through personal interaction. I communicate and ensure that the retail stores understand the value of the source ingredients. To achieve this, building a trust relationship through direct meetings is essential. Kevin may think everything can be done online, but I disagree. My views are in direct conflict with those of Steve and Kevin, and this further deteriorated the relationship between the two parties. Their contempt for me intensified, making it clear they wanted me out of the company. And finally, I reached my breaking point. As I was working in the office, the two of them approached as usual.
A low-educated person shouldn't be a manager, right?
Kevin said that, looking down on me.
Exactly. You're fired.
Steve continued with a mocking tone. I had endured these insults time and again. While the one saying it might not feel anything, it's unbearable for the one on the receiving end. My mind was made up, and I was ready. I was done tolerating this company. I would make them regret ever looking down on me. Is that so? Understood. I'll resign, effective today. My straightforward resignation seemed to surprise Steve and Kevin as they exchanged looks. Then, their expressions relaxed, and they burst into laughter.
So, you're quitting. Finally, we're free from a low-educated idiot.
Watching the two rejoice, I felt a sense of despair. But it wasn't for my future. It was despair for Steve, Kevin, and perhaps the future of this company. I submitted my resignation that day, and I put into motion the plan I had prepared before resigning. 3 months before resigning, I had a meeting with a contact from a company. This company operates a supermarket chain called S Market, which is part of S Holdings. S Market was the biggest client for Y Foods, and I managed most of the sales channels there. Moreover, if you include group companies, over 50% of Y Foods clients were under S Holdings. The person in charge at S Market approached me. They noticed my role as a bridge between producers and retailers and suggested that I consider changing jobs. If producers and retailers could connect directly, it would cut the intermediary margins paid to wholesale companies. Some of that saved money could then be passed back to the producers, benefiting both sides. This was S Market's proposal. However, establishing connections with top-notch producers is no easy task. It requires keen judgment and a trustful relationship with the producers. You won't understand their growing environment, peak seasons, or whether they use pesticides excessively without visiting them in person. That's why they saw fit to target someone like me who is well-versed in these matters. I agreed with S Market's approach and was positively considering it, waiting for the right moment. Exiting the wholesale stage would mean negotiating directly with the producers and arranging for distribution. Without careful planning and understanding, the project could falter. But I had built up trust over many years. This allowed me to prepare without much difficulty. And when everything was ready, the moment came. A month after resigning, I received a call from Steve.
Mike, what the hell have you done?
Steve's voice was furious. What happened? I knew what was going on but pretended to be unaware.
Don't play dumb. You told the farmers to stop shipments, didn't you?
He was right. After moving to S Market, I had contacted all the farmers I dealt with and halted their shipments to Y Foods. Instead, S Market would purchase directly from them. Is that so? That's unfortunate. But isn't that the farmer's decision? If there's someone willing to pay more, changing suppliers is just logical, right? I responded calmly, aggravating Steve further.
I'm not talking about 1 or 2 cases. It's strange that all the farmers you were in charge of stopped at once.
Steve ranted in frustration. No amount of yelling from Steve could faze me anymore. I calmly assessed the situation that was bound to happen and spoke the lines I had prepared. That's all there was to it. If I were the one calling the farmers and they agreed to it, would there be any problem with that? I asked coldly, and Steve could only groan in response. There was no issue here. The farmers I've worked with are free to decide where to supply their products. I've dealt with producers based on a relationship of trust. There's no obligation for them to supply Y Foods exclusively.
You're out for revenge, huh? You're doing this because we made fun of you.
Maybe. I'm not as smart as you or Kevin, so I wouldn't know. My casual remark fueled Steve's anger even more.
You, don't mock me. Call the farmers now and get them to ship the products, or else.
Or else? What will happen?
Or else we'll never buy from them again. Tell that to the farmers.
His arrogance was astounding. Did Steve really think he was at the top of the food chain? It's not about buying from them. It's please sell to us. He doesn't understand that. He looked down on the farmers, the very starting point of the food chain. I can pass the message, but they might just say they'll never sell to you again. My words made Steve even more agitated.
Mike, you're pretty bold, aren't you? Well, I have my ways too. There are plenty of farmers out there. Even if we don't buy directly from them, we can source products elsewhere. Your revenge means nothing to me.
Steve's extreme arrogance made my stomach turn. There was no reaching him. To someone who thinks the world revolves around him, further discussion was pointless. Does your company have farmers willing to sell to you? And remember, the retailers we contract with have strict quality standards. I said this with an implication and abruptly ended the call. Steve might say he's unbothered, but this was just a jab. I'm about to deal a decisive blow. I smirked at my silent phone. I could clearly see Y Foods struggling with procurement. This was evident as the volume of food being delivered to S Market had drastically decreased. There is a purchase agreement between S Market and Y Foods, preventing unilateral termination until the contract expires. However, if Y Foods can't supply enough, the situation changes. I've been waiting for this moment. And then I'll notify Steve of the contract termination. Sales Manager Steve, right. I'm Mike, now the head of procurement at S Market. I called from my personal phone, not using the company line.
Mike, why are you at S Market?
I've changed jobs since I was fired from Y Foods. Steve's response faltered momentarily. He must be desperately trying to sort out his thoughts amid the confusion. I quickly moved to the main topic. I intend to discuss terminating our contract with your company. When would be convenient for you? Steve, flustered, interjected.
Wait, what? Why are we talking about terminating the contract all of a sudden? And why do I have to hear this from you?
I spoke calmly to the unsettled Steve. I'll explain in detail later. For now, could you just tell me when you're available? His confusion was palpable. It was understandable that Steve found it hard to grasp that I, whom they drove out for being undereducated, had moved to a client company. For Steve, this must be an unexpected scenario. But I was the one making it happen. Unable to organize his thoughts, Steve agreed to my visit. He probably couldn't refuse since I wanted to meet in person. Soon after, I headed to Y Foods. Entering the Y Foods headquarters building as an employee of S Market felt like stepping into enemy territory. It sent a shiver down my spine. Once in the conference room, after a while, Steve and Kevin appeared. Since he was there simply as the president's son, Kevin's presence here hardly mattered. But this situation was convenient for my revenge. Let's proceed with the termination of the contract. I started the meeting with handing over my business card and cutting to the chase.
Wait a second. We'll talk about that later. First, tell me why you're with S-Market.
Panic was evident on Steve's face. Beside him, Kevin looked utterly perplexed, observing the unfolding events. This was a perfect opportunity to teach this novice the harsh realities of the business world. I first questioned Steve's demeanor. "Steve, you were an elite with a high education, weren't you? Then, I would expect you to at least adhere to business etiquette. Calling someone from a client company you and demanding answers so rudely doesn't seem very professional, does it?" Steve frowned but offered no apology. He didn't want to acknowledge me as a representative of a client company. Kevin, next to us, sported a smug smile, peering at Steve's face. Apparently, he felt no tension in this situation. "Well, it seems manners and education are two different things," I mused, casting a quick glance at Steve. I then recounted my transition to S-Market, how I was tormented for being undereducated, my growing doubts about Y-Food's greed, the realization that direct transactions between retailers and producers could cut costs, and how Steve repeatedly told me I was fired. I poured out all my thoughts and shared how I was scouted by S-Market.
That's funny, isn't it?
Kevin interjected suddenly.
You got mad at Steve for belittling you, so you switched to a client company, and now you're cutting off the contract as payback. Hilarious.
I gave Kevin a stern look, but he just kept grinning. He didn't seem to grasp the implications of our contract termination. What a foolish rookie.
Steve, just end the contract with this company already. We can manage without them, right? Thay's S restaurant, S store, S processed foods, S dairy, plenty of other clients. Dropping one contract should be no big deal.
Frustration was evident in Steve's eyes as he glanced at Kevin.
Those are all part of the S-Market conglomerate.
Steve muttered that with his shoulders slumping.
Really?
Kevin exclaimed in surprise, completely taken aback. I'm utterly speechless at his ignorance. This novice doesn't even know our company's clients properly? If S-Market pulls out, its affiliated companies will likely follow suit in terminating the contracts. That means Y-Foods would lose sales channels comprising 50% of the total transaction volume.
But we can just find new ones, right? It's totally doable.
Kevin patted Steve's shoulder. Steve brushed his hand away. The gravity of the situation seemed to have finally hit Steve, leaving him without the energy to correct Kevin. So, I explained it for them. With all due respect, even if you secure new sales channels, you can't do business without products to sell. Steve gave me a puzzled look, shooting a sharp glance my way. I continued, pressing my point. Our company has directly contracted not only with the rice, vegetable, and fruit farmers previously associated with the head office, but with all the producers I was involved with. In other words, your company has lost not just the sales channels, but also the supply sources. As I spoke, Kevin's eyes darted around nervously.
That's unbelievably bad.
He finally realized the severity. Meanwhile, Steve burst out.
Mike, are you that upset about being mocked for your education?
I looked at Steve coldly. You only know how to hit others, never feeling the blow yourself. That's why you can say such terrible things without a second thought. But it's not just about being mocked for my education. I wouldn't have gone this far for that alone. What I couldn't forgive was Steve's despicable plan to exploit the producers and overcharge the retailers. Steve said, business is about deceiving each other. The smart exploit the foolish, that's business. The smart trick the foolish in business. Steve had said that, claiming that the tricksters win and the fooled lose. I couldn't stand such blatant statements. Steve, you said business is all about deception, right? So, I played the game by your rules. By cutting Y-Foods out, both our company and the producers benefit. It's a win-win. Suddenly, Kevin stood up. His eyes were bloodshot. He then stormed out of the conference room. Steve was shaking slightly, looking for a chance to counter, but he was speechless. Eventually, the matter escalated beyond the sales director's level, and the president stepped in to negotiate. My explanation ends here. I concluded in the president's office, laying bare the entire saga to President John. I reported everything, including the harassment from Steve and Kevin during my time at Y Foods, and how Steve disdained producers and retailers. As my narrative unfolded, the president's expression grew stern, and he reached his limit.
Get Steve and Kevin in here now.
An irritated John demanded them to come over the intercom.
What have you done? Apologize to Mike right now.
Upon their arrival, he rebuked them. His furious demeanor was almost demonic.
I'm sorry.
Steve cowered under his intensity. Kevin looked on with a detached gaze.
Kevin, apologize too.
Why should I? It's Steve's fault, isn't it? He's the one who upset the old man.
John approached Kevin, who showed no remorse. He stood squarely before him, grabbing his collar. His right hand was clenched into a fist. I quickly moved beside John and gently grasped his wrist. Let's stop this. Fists won't solve anything. I whispered that to John. John looked deeply into my eyes and nodded slightly.
Kevin, apologize.
He commanded in a low, soft voice. Yielding to the intense pressure, Kevin apologized.
Steve, I can't believe how foolish you've been. Be prepared to take responsibility for your actions. And Kevin, I overestimated you. I'm ashamed of how you've turned out.
John sharply criticized them, but suddenly stopped, overcome by a sense of futility. Then he turned his gaze towards me.
Mike, I truly apologize. It was my mistake to have Steve in our most important sales division. I thought Kevin could become a sincere professional under a spirited businessman like you. It seems I overestimated my foolish son. I'm truly sorry.
John apologized several times. He then quietly accepted the termination, signing the document. I expect similar notices from our affiliates soon. You should be prepared. I said that, and John nodded. Then he dismissed Steve and Kevin and turned to me.
This is all my fault. I'll ensure Steve and Kevin face appropriate consequences. We'll likely suffer catastrophic damage, but we will rise again. I've learned from you about the right way to run a wholesale business.
Leaving the president's office, I saw John with a lonely smile. I wondered what punishment Steve and Kevin would face. While imagining this, a faint pain throbbed in my chest as I pictured John's face. It was reminiscent of the emotions felt after a boxing match, when exchanging handshakes with an opponent I had thoroughly defeated. Y Foods, having lost a major client, temporarily ceased operations. Many employees were forced to find new jobs, with some being accepted by S Market and S Holdings Group companies. Faced with an existential crisis, Y Foods drastically downsized to pave its way to recovery. John planned to rebuild from scratch the procurement and sales channels. Naturally, Steve was not part of these plans. He was dismissed for his actions. Kevin, being his son, wasn't abandoned but was set for rigorous retraining. Rumor has it he's now enduring the harshness of life on a tuna fishing boat, a world where academic credentials hold no sway. This might be the necessary lesson for someone like Kevin. However, it's highly doubtful he can withstand such extreme conditions. Yet, once on the fishing boat, there's no quick return. No matter how tough it gets, there's nothing to be done about it. After switching jobs to S Market, I was transferred to oversee the procurement for the entire S Group holdings. My position remains as a manager, but moving from a company under the group to overseeing the entire group division is essentially a promotion. I'm now on a special mission to source the finest ingredients, traveling across the USA. My salary has significantly increased, and I've gained the freedom to act as I please. I've come full circle, able to do the job as I used to. I confront producers directly, taking on all their hardships to procure ingredients, to deliver the treasures produced through hardship to consumers in the best possible state. That's the mission given to me.